Welcome to Meet, Act, and Part, a Masonic podcast hosted by Midnight Freemasons Greg Knott, Darin, Todd Creason, and Bill Hostler. The views, opinions and experiences that are expressed by the hosts or guests as individual Freemasons do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant body, or Masonic authority to which the hosts or guests belong. And now on with the show.
And welcome to another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part. This is episode 48, and we're going to call this one Masonic Legends. I am your host, Darin, and I'm here with the good-looking Cavalier, Bill Hostler. Say hello, Bill.
Well, I think I'm more of a Chevette than a Cavalier, but good evening.
So we wanted to talk about some Masonic legends, and Bill had written a very good article on Midnight Freemasons website, and Bill entitled it "Forget Me, Not My Obligation," but Bill kind of delves into, I would say, three pretty strong legends that are taught in Freemasonry as being true, but when you actually kind of do the research, they fall apart. So, Bill, why don't you just kind of introduce us to what made you think about the topic for your article, and then we'll go from there.
Well, one of the first things is that when I first became a Mason, I first heard about the Forget-Me-Not legend. And I remember it gave me a warm feeling thinking about how these brothers, in the face of in the face of a dictatorship and possibly losing their lives and their families' lives, being put in concentration camps and such, still tried to communicate and help each other. And the only way that they could meet forms of recognition was through the Forget-Me-Not flower. And that really gave me a good feeling, and it gave me a good feeling about the fraternity, not just what they did and how they tried, basically helped, their part in toppling the Nazi regime. But it just really gave me a good feeling. And then, you start to hear other legends and such. And at one point, I was reading an article in the Oklahoma Freemason magazine. And the current Grand Master at the time, Brad Rinkelman, had written a story about how the Forget-Me-Not story was fiction. And I remember feeling gut punched. I mean, it just really set me back, finding out that it's not true. And you start thinking about all these brothers, we've built an entire fraternity almost on a lot of that notion. We have tie tacks, we have ties, we have, I don't know how many brothers will tell another brother, and it just becomes like this great big long line perpetuating this. And then at first, when I first found out, my first thought was to start to dispel the rumor, saying, well, no, honestly, it's not true. It was false, and I'd try to give it. And it never really was well received. I don't know that they were disappointed or they didn't believe me, or that they just didn't care. They thought it was a great story and they just wanted to perpetuate it. And I got to thinking, if what we could do, even if it isn't true, and we tell the brother at the beginning it isn't true, but we could go up there and use that as a point on how to actually basically fulfill your obligations. It's a good example of how almost like sort of like the third degrees second part. It's another one of these, and it's another way we teach what we secrecy and things like that. And I thought that's a good it's a good way of teaching what we're trying to preach to these young brothers. And then I read the book, Our Heroes and, what was it, Our Better Heroes and Demons, I can't think of the name of the book off the top of my head. Better Our Angels and Demons by Brother Michael Halloran. And upon reading that, I found out the Friend to Friend memorial was also not true. And once again, another sucker punch. And we already use that in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction to teach. So it's a good example of what we could do with the Forget-Me-Not. And, and they try to do it with like a story in the Scottish or in the Northern Scottish Rite about Benedict Arnold and dedication and patriotism. There's so many of these legends that aren't true that really they are teachable moments, even if they aren't true. And then recently on his podcast, R.J. Johnson had on a brother with the Masonic Mythbusters who proved that the lodge over Simpkins Store never actually existed, which I don't know, for some reason I never really did think it ever did. I just thought it was a story, but apparently others had thought it was true. And so it's really, they all could be, one's to teach, brotherhood and secrecy. Another one teaches, taking care of each other, Masonic charity with it to each other. Another one teaches the spreading the cement of brotherly love. So each one of these has potential to be able to teach Masonic teachings. And then I got to thinking toward the end, each one of these has been told so many times by so many people, and people and the brethren love these stories, and you don't hear about any of them really being made today. They're all in the past. Then I realized, probably the big reason is nobody's going to write a fable or a long, beautiful story about listening to the minutes of a meeting or, the treasurer's report or some type of teaching moment about doing a fish fry. And so it kind of tells me that this is what the brethren really look for, is the stuff, the brotherhood that's in those fables, not what we're giving them. And that's also in itself a teachable moment. If we want Masonry, we want pretty much something more than just what we're offering them.
Yeah. So I understand that these tales aren't true, but like you said, Bill, they are teachable moments, and I think what's kind of, I'll talk about, I don't know much about the lodge over Simpkins Store other than what was talked about in the Once Came You episode that you referenced. It was episode 536, I believe, that was referenced in, and you've got a link to that episode in your article. But I want to talk really quickly about the Forget-Me-Not. So irregardless of whether it was or wasn't used as a symbol, and all signs point to it not being used as a symbol during the war, post-war, it was given out by the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Germany, Dr. Theodor Vogel, and he distributed the pin as a token of friendship when he made official visits abroad in 1948, and most notably at the Conference of the Grand Masters in Washington, D.C. in February 1953. And he kind of recounted the tragic tale of Freemasonry under the Nazi regime, and he expressed a hope that the pin would be worn in remembrance of that oppression. So I think that even though the pin, the mythology behind the pin wasn't necessarily true, I think what the pin stands for now is really, really powerful. And I don't think that just because the mythology behind it wasn't true lessens the impact that symbol means today. I've got a bow tie with the Forget-Me-Not, and when I wear that, I not only think about the oppression that was suffered, not only by the Freemasons, but by everyone, especially the Jewish people under the Nazi regime and the Holocaust, but also I think about the kind of beauty of what the symbol represents now, and that it represents, these ideas of brotherly love and remembrance and fidelity, these ideas that are evoked when you view this symbol. So I think that by the same token, the same thing applies to the monument, the Brotherly Love Monument at Gettysburg. If you, I don't know if you've ever seen it in person, but it is just a very moving monument, and the lessons that are taught in the 26th degree of the Northern jurisdiction, the ancient accepted Scottish Rite. It's the Prince of Mercy degree, but it's nicknamed the Civil War degree. And so the story that monument tells about the friendship between Armistead and Hancock, I think, is, very powerful. And it kind of, I think, talks to the impact that Freemasonry did have on the battlefield. And whether these stories are myth or not, you often have tales being told of prisoners being captured and giving, the Masonic sign of distress and then having their lives spared. You hear this potentially at the Alamo, the people that think that Davy Crockett survived the Alamo, and because both he and the general of the Mexican forces were Freemasons, and that he displayed the Grand Hailing sign at the Alamo and was able to live out his days as a alive, essentially, instead of killed at the Alamo.
King in Saginaw, Michigan.
Or, something like that, but. But the point being that you hear these tales, and one of the best ones I heard was that these American forces came upon a German tank crew that had been killed, and I believe this was in the early days of the war when had invaded and were fighting through the desert to oust the Germans from Libya and Egypt, and they came across a dead tank crew, and one of the tank crew had on a Masonic ring. Now, whether or not this is true, because, obviously the Freemasons were banned at that point.
Yeah, I kind of think that wouldn't happen, but...
Well, but you have to also understand that, the regular German Wehrmacht and the SS were two separate kind of entities. The SS were, the very hardcore Nazis. The Wehrmacht, for the most part, were, technically Nazis, but they were, in essence, they were the troops that were conscripted, so on and so forth. So the point being that they came across this tank crew. One of the German soldiers who had perished had on a Masonic ring, or they recognized as a Masonic ring, and some of the soldiers there that were Masons gave that soldier Masonic rites when they buried him. So it's these kind of tales, I think, that talk about the legacy, talk to the legacy of Freemasonry and the brotherly love that we have for each other.
Oh, sure. And there are a lot of instances, even as far as I know, that are actually true of those. I know in the Civil War that those did happen. The one I was just sitting here thinking of, and I'd heard one time there was a story, and to be honest, I had never really thought about till this one day. There was a brother who was having an operation, and I guess he was extremely nervous, and as he was on the operating table and they were just about to give him the gas to put him under, the surgeon could see how upset and nervous he was, and he spied the brother's Masonic ring, and he tapped the ring with his ring through his rubber glove, and says, "Don't worry, brother, you're going to be all right." And then the guy calmed down, and they went on to the operation. And I always thought that was another good one. Then it's like I was thinking one day, it's like, whenever I've been in surgery, they divest you of all metals. They don't leave you with anything. In fact, I didn't even have any hair anywhere after the last one. But then I thought, well, doctors remove all their jewelry and such when they're scrubbing up. So that one doesn't even come close to holding water. But you obviously know who Joseph Fort Newton is, or was.
Yeah.
I almost put this in the article, but then I realized it just was running too much. His father was a Confederate soldier in the Civil War, and he was captured and taken up, I think, to Illinois. And he was getting deathly ill, and one of the soldiers told the commander about this man, and they mentioned that he was a Mason, and so he took Newton's father out took him home, nursed him back to health, and then once the war was over, gave him a train fare back down to Texas. And there's an instance right there how, that can affect, the future. If that brother wouldn't have helped the other brother, we wouldn't have had the builders and a lot of the Masonic literature that we have today. So, I mean, and I know that one is actually true because it's been in the Philadelphia's and a lot of the, Masonic, the more reputable Masonic magazines and such. But I think it was a Masonic funeral in Mississippi once where a brother who had been a sailor on a ship was killed, and both sides paused, and they gave him a Masonic rites funeral, and then went back to their respective sides. Alan Roberts has got a couple of books about all of those, and it's still amazing to this day about that.
Yeah, and I think something that we kind of lose perspective on is that the most important lesson in Freemasonry that's taught during the second section of the third degree is essentially a legend, correct?
Absolutely.
We have, Hiram Abiff is hardly mentioned in the Bible. He's mentioned more in some of the esoteric Jewish literature, but still, essentially, we have the Hiramic legend kind of coming into existence in I guess it was probably very late 1720s, but most likely into the 1730s. Prior to that, they taught
Noah.
Yeah, so they taught the same lesson, but it was with Noah and his three sons going to raise Noah instead of the three fellow craft who end up helping with the raising of Hiram Abiff. So, our fraternity itself and our ritual itself is for greater part founded on legend. I mean, there's even the idea of King Solomon's Temple is something that historians debate because there's just not a lot of archaeological evidence that it existed. And it's, depending on how many layers of the onion you want to, pull off.
Are you trying to allude that Pythagoras probably wasn't a Mason?
Well, I do know for a fact that he didn't shout "Eureka" like it's taught in the it's taught in the third degree lecture.
There was one time when I was still running the Masonic Temple that we had the ballroom, and whoever had painted it, and of course it had been 50 years, they painted the white walls, and they had all this decorative plasterwork, and they painted it all in real ugly lime greens and oranges and purples and such. It was terrible, and people would even comment when they walk in, just look how ugly that looked. And I made a comment one time about we should really paint this over and make it look a little more classy because we're renting this out. And some guy piped up, he said, "We can't do that. Don't you realize the reason that was painted that way is those were the colors inside of King Solomon's Temple?" And I just kind of, shook my head and went on, but...
Did you ask the brother, because I'm hoping this is an older brother, did you ask him if he knew that for a fact because he was there, or...
He might have been. He was older, but yeah, I think, it's stuff like that. I mean, there was a brother, Lance Cates. He used to be my partner in crime in Oklahoma, and his one of his lodge members there in Oklahoma, he despised rounded-bottomed aprons. He called them clandestine. He said they were no such thing as ever had round aprons and such thing. He said it's always been square. Kind of like square work only. And so we used to laugh. We'd talk about those clandestine aprons. And, it was like some of the one, we see you see that picture of George Washington with a rounded apron at the bottom. It says, George with his clandestine ways.
Yeah, I was just going to mention because the Grand Lodge of Philadelphia has one of Washington's aprons in its museum, and it's, as I recall, had a rounded bottom. So,
well, they up until like the late 1800s, they were all that way. The only reason that they ended up squaring them was because of the mass production, and they were easier to sew, and they were easier to put into a box.
Right.
So, I mean, that's how they ended up coming up. So I guess we have modern capitalism and the Industrial Revolution to thank for squared aprons, but it's like, well, have you never really looked at anything or done any reading or research? But I already knew the answer to that, so...
Yes, well, I'm sure that you mentioning Washington was clandestine because of his apron has already caused all of our listeners' heads to explode.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they're probably gathering firewood and tar coast to coast right now, and they'll be heading for Arkansas.
And for those of you who want to hunt down Bill in Arkansas, here's his address.
Yeah. 123 Main Street, yeah. I'm not too worried because as many people over the years as wanted the tar and feather me, and I haven't had it yet. Besides that, as big as I am, do you know how much tar that would take?
Yeah. Me saying that reminded me of the old Monty Python sketch, the blackmail sketch. I don't know if you remember that, where they essentially, it's a game show, but they mention some, very risque situation and then say, so-and-so, if you don't want this film of your exploits to get out, send a check to blah, 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 and they flash the address on the screen.
Hey, maybe that's the way we can start funding our temples.
Maybe. I mean, that's one way of doing it, I guess.
There are so many different legends, and it's like I put in that article. Each one of us has our own memories of lodge things and lodge brothers who are no longer with us, and they kind of make up like a patchwork. And that's kind of in a way what, to me, fraternity is in a lot of ways, kind of like a big quilt with all the people and the stories that they have and the events that we've all entered into, kind of sewn together into like a brotherhood. It's been really on my mind a lot. That's been really on my mind a lot lately because next month it'll be 20 years since I became an entered apprentice. And I was thinking back to that day and how, number one, how scared I was. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And all the ribbing that happened that night, and some of the stuff that did happen that wasn't meant to be ribbon, and the brethren that were there, and how they're no longer here because they were older at the time. And it's like, we had some good times, and it's like, they really, I miss a lot of those guys. And I even started to think that all three of them who were on my investigating committee are now passed on. And it's just amazing how it feels like just a couple of minutes, but how much difference things are is just in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I just celebrated my 10-year this past November of 2021 and of being a Master Mason. It would have been late September that I would have received my EA 2011, so my 10-year of that passed as well. And to your point, I think about some of the brothers that either are no longer with us or some of the brothers that were very, very active Masons and then for whatever reason strayed away from the craft and are no longer contributing to the craft. So it's really kind of an interesting exercise, of how you view these brothers. And then, there's one particular brother that was very active. He was past master of our lodge in St. Joe, and he was suspended by the Grand Lodge. I won't say why. And the rumors are kind of going around that he wants to get back in. And in Illinois, the process essentially is that he would petition the lodge would then vote on his petition and then send it to Grand Lodge, and the Grand Lodge Jurisprudence Committee would investigate and then ask the members of St. Joe why, they, assuming we were to vote positively for him to return, why we felt so positive about his return, and then assuming he gets past that layer, then it would be brought up for a vote at Grand Lodge. And just the amount of hoops that you have to go through, I won't state my own personal opinion on the brother, but I just think, for him to return, it's an uphill battle, right? And I've only I guess I've probably gone to Grand Lodge now 5 of the 10 years that I've been in, 5 or 6 of the 10 years I've been in. I've only seen one brother in all of that time get reinstated. And he was an older gentleman who got caught back in the day for marijuana possession. And he was growing his own smoke apparently, and got in trouble with the law, and had felony charge and got suspended. But this was, I guess, probably 20 years ago or so, and so now he's an older gentleman, wanted to die as a Mason, and the Grand Lodge voted him back in. And I think that's kind of just at that time, marijuana had been legalized for recreational use here in Illinois. So, I think the stigma around it is probably lessened greatly. That's the only case that I can personally recall of somebody getting voted back in.
Yeah, see, the ones in Indiana, it seems it's kind of the total opposite. The only one I remember who wasn't voted back in, there was one out of this whole time I was going to Grand Lodge, and he had to wait another 6 or 9 months before he was allowed to come back in, and that was Chris Hodap. He got suspended for something. He was basically on a trumped up charge, and so he had to sit out for a little while and just live his life and run his business that he had at the time. So, but then he eventually got back in, as we all know, and it's history from there.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I didn't know that about Chris. I guess who would have written Freemasons for dummies, if not for him? And,
there would have probably been nobody else to have been able to do it.
Right, and not only that, but he's the common figure that's on all the History Channel specials or American Eras Channel specials, or you name a special about Freemasonry, Chris Hodap's or American Freemasonry, I should say, Chris Hodap's is going to show up. So
yeah, it's kind of, I do kind of get a kick out of that, but in fact, he was part of the group that I was in, and in a way, as much as I hate to say it, I almost pity more the brethren who aren't with us because they walked away than the ones who departed. I mean, we're all going to depart someday, and we're all going to go to that Grand Lodge above. But the brothers who just get frustrated and walk away from Masonry because it's not changing, that's the ones I really pity, because they're helping perpetuate the problems we're having. Because if everybody who had quit that I know had stayed and kept the fight going, we might have changed even more than we have in the last 20 years. I mean, we've changed a great deal. Of a lot of the stuff that we wanted to do at the Knights of the North has been accomplished. I mean, there's still a lot to go. But if we would have stayed in the fight and used that one thing that we have as Masons, and that's a vote in our local lodges and our Grand Lodges, we might have actually turned the tide, because there's more Masons coming in, and then who knows, than going out, or passing away. We could have probably really fixed things the way we think they should be fixed. It's a few years ago, I wrote a thing called the Chinese bamboo tree, and I watched a preacher on TV talking about it, and basically what it was is that you want to plant this bamboo tree. You have to care for it and nurture it every day. You have to water it. You have to weed it. You have to do all this stuff, and you can't fail. It has to be every day, and it doesn't grow. You don't see it. You just have to know it's down there. But in the 5th year, it'll grow, and it'll grow to like 10 15 times what you expected. I mean, it's like massive then in just 1 year. And I kind of looked at it as like, that's what we've been doing. We've had the faith that we could change things and we could, make Freemasonry great again. But so many people are like, well, I gave it 6 months, it didn't work. I tried this, it didn't work. They laughed at me at lodge. They said they've never done it this way, and they walk. Well, you're just kind of letting that bamboo tree die. And so if every man who gets frustrated would just continue to knuckle down and keep going, and if he knows a brother who's quit, talk him back in and keep him in the fight. Can you imagine the things we could do, and what we could do with Freemasonry if we all stood united and we all worked together toward a common fraternity?
Yeah, it's a nice thought.
I know.
I was going to say, unfortunately, though, there are, a lot of brothers that just want Freemasonry to be their good old boys club. They go there to get away from the wives, and they don't want no education. They just want to, get to the after lodge festivities and complain about the roof repairs or building repairs or the price of toilet paper or whatever. And I often feel that a lot of these older brothers, we used to have one at St. Joe. He's not passed on, but he's in a nursing home. He's suffered from dementia, and it was pretty apparent during some of his later meetings that he would, I think, just enjoyed the sound of his own voice. And I don't know if it was because he didn't get a word in edgewise with his wife or why, but he would, regardless of any point that was brought up, he'd have something to say about it. Sometimes, especially as the dementia kind of set in more and more with him, it got less and less coherent. He would use profanity. I mean, it was really, we essentially, it was the worst thing I've ever had to do as a Mason. But in order to keep our lodge together and keep the harmony in our lodge, we had to get the Grandmaster involved and essentially have the Grandmaster censure him and tell him essentially that he could stay a Mason, but he had to stay away from our lodge because we could not, conduct business, or we could not, for the health of the lodge, because there were many individuals, myself included, that were at the point where we were just like, enough is enough. We can't conduct business this way. We can't have education. There are things that we need to do that he's prohibiting us to do. And I mean, in retrospect, I know it's not brotherly love. The thing that we did to him wasn't brotherly love, but at the same time,
well, in a way, it sounds to me like in a way it could be considered. You're keeping him from making himself look like a fool. You tried everything you could, and you also had to keep harmony and keep everything in the lodge. You sound like you tried your best to keep him, and you basically tried to keep him from making himself look crazy. And so that, in a way, I think is a kind of a saving grace.
Yeah, but it's still heartbreaking,
Sure.
And then with COVID, we've not been able to visit him, so it's I don't know if they relaxed the visitation at the nursing home or not. I need to check into that, actually. I should pay him a visit if I can. But that's assuming he'd even recognize who I was. So it's just a sad tale. But, it's I guess, as you said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one or the few. So, we needed to essentially, he was a cancerous growth in the lodge, right? So we had to get rid of that growth in order to save the rest of the body.
Well, in a lot of lodges would have probably just, had him removed for conduct unbecoming. So, you didn't do that. So
yeah, there was a point where we were thinking about doing Masonic charges, and honestly, I'm glad it didn't come to that, because I think that would have been messy and not the right thing. I think we probably handled it the best we potentially could handle it. The last conversation I recall having with him, I remember him asking if I was still a member of the uppity St. Joe Lodge. So he was true to the last. But But it is, it is sad because I remember, him as when I was a younger Mason. I was 38, I guess, when I joined. So I wasn't too young, but, I remember him being more coherent, and he would have an outburst now and again, but, it wasn't as much as it was towards the end where it was like every minute it was just pure chaos with him and you just didn't know what to expect. But yeah, I mean, it was hard to see him kind of go through that trajectory, and it saddens me the way that things ended up. But like I said, essentially that's what had to be done.
Yeah, and that's sad. I've never encountered. Well, I have, but it was the brother passed away, so we didn't have to worry about it. But we have made strides in the last 20 years, and I mean. And getting back, I think that we lost, that the point of what we were talking about, the Forget-Me-Not and Masonic Legends is way in our rearview mirror by now. But I think there's some of these all kind of dovetail into one thing, is that we do have a possibility for teachable moments for a lot of, things that we do. I mean, and we could, we use Hiram Abiff, which we all know. I mean, but it just seems to me like we could use a lot of these to enhance our method, trying to think. Well, I think Forget-Me-Not, to teach, a brother's bond, his word is his bond, and the secrecy. There's a lodge in, I forget where. I think they may even be out by now. But there was a lodge that I talked to a brother who no longer is in that country, but was in the Middle East, and they meet in secret, and they have to make sure that nobody knows where their lodge room's at, that nobody knows what they identify themselves as Masons. It's a very secretive thing, just because otherwise they will be hauled in and tortured and killed. And so, I mean, it's kind of like the Forget-Me-Not story, but actually true. And, at the time, it really impressed me that these brethren will go through all these things, possibility of losing their lives and losing their families and everything they own to be a Mason, to do something that we really just take for granted. And half the time, we don't even bother to show up to lodge because, there's a baseball game on, or, I don't feel like dressing up tonight, or, I don't know. But these guys are so dedicated that they are perfectly willing to risk everything to do what we nonchalantly do when we feel like it.
Yeah, I think American Freemasons probably don't realize how good they have it, because in a lot of countries, there is kind of very much that suspicion or anti-Masonic public perception. Think about our brethren in the UK, for example. The tabloids just love to rake the Freemasons over the coals, and a Masonic membership really is kind of not advertised over there because of these prevailing thoughts about the special treatment Masons supposedly receive, and so on and so forth. So, and here we are in America, and we'll put the damn square and compass on, about anything you could put it on, right? So it's just, once again, I think we as Americans probably need to do a bit of introspection and think about, how Masonry is in other parts of the world, because it is, in certain parts of the world, like you said, you have brothers that are meeting very secretly and potentially, could lose their lives, their family, their well-being, their possessions, everything you mentioned, just because they are Masons. So I think it's, something that we should consider.
Well, and it's like, you been on the Midnight Freemasons, social media thing, seen some of it. Or how many times do we get people from Africa or the Middle East or just very impoverished areas begging to become Masons? I mean, it's just, and you try to help them or tell them, in some cases tell them, says, your government does not allow it. Or, you try to give them the information that they require, but sometimes there isn't a Freemasons lodge within 1,000 miles of their location. And these people are begging for it. And it just really saddens me that we can't even get our folks to really treasure what they take for granted.
Yeah, but I do wonder if some of these pleas are because these people that are impoverished think that they're going to get wealth or power.
I think that's a lot of it. I really do.
So I mean, how many of these guys are reaching out that do not, are pure of heart, want to be a Freemason because, and not because the mercenary things that they, motives, as we say, that potentially they think come with becoming a Freemason. So,
well, look how many, I don't know how about you, but I don't know how many brethren I've seen that join the lodge, and then when they find out that it's not going to help them in their business, you never see them again. So it happens here too, but another one that gets me is, and these same people, impoverished people, these damn Illuminati clan, sites, will come pop up, and they'll go up there and they'll promise them the world, wealth and power and all these things, and then they just steal what little bit of money they have. And I don't hate a lot of people, but it's people like that I just really loathe. That you're preying on somebody who can barely feed themselves, or probably living in a hut somewhere, and they got like a little Android Dollar Tree phone and maybe a few dollars to rub together, and they're trying to take it from them to enrich themselves, while these poor people over here, they're going to be even worse shape than they were before they started out. It just really, I hope there's I know this is probably not the place to say it, but I really hope there's a special place in hell for people like that.
And that being said, if you want to support the program, please go to Patreon and support us.
Yeah, we're different. We don't offer wealth and power except to us.
I kid.
Yeah. That beat up old car you got is sure that one got through the Illuminati.
So, Bill, let's, I guess, wrap this up. So what have we learned? That these lessons are, even though they might not be 100% historically true, they still teach us lessons that we can learn from. And I think you made a good point about teachable moments and moments that we can use to, in our own lives or our own Masonic experiences to teach the brethren coming behind us, or even the ones that are in with us in our lodges, some of, these lessons about brotherly love and using experiences like, we've mentioned as teachable moments.
And absolutely. And, one of the best parts about it is none of these could even remotely be considered to be esoteric. So you could convey them by a video. You could do it by a book. You could do it by, acting out a play like the Scottish Rite. You could make that almost as public as you wish to teach this, because there's nothing even esoteric about it. And who knows if, it might even be somebody who sees this might actually want to even become a Mason because they've seen it. To me, it just makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Anything else you want to say before we part, Bill?
No. Maybe just support us on Patreon. The three guys that are carrying our water are probably getting a little tired. They probably need some help. We can't get wealth and power with three brethren helping us,
That's true. So if you want us to, if you want to help Greg, Bill, and myself achieve great power and wealth, please support us on Patreon.
Listener supported, meet active part.
But in all seriousness, thank you to our listeners and our three supporters on Patreon. We appreciate your time and your donation to keep our little program chugging along.
And your patience.
And your patience. And we'll look to have another episode out hopefully sooner than this last one. I know we've been doing about one a month. We need to probably tighten the screws on that a little, but to be honest with the listeners, we've been trying out a couple different platforms, trying to settle on one that'll help us get some more guests. I just would like to once again say thank you to our listeners, and thanks for listening to another episode of Meet, Act, and Part.
Thank you for listening to Meet, Act, and Part. For more information about our show, visit our website at www.meetactandpart.com. While there, please consider supporting the show by sponsoring us on Patreon. Until we meet again, may we meet, act, and part.